The focus of this afternoon's press conference is to outline the preliminary results of the Phase 2 geophysical investigation of St. Joseph's Mission Residential School. The presentation that you're going to see involves discussion of Indian residential schools, genocide, abuse, death of children, colonial impacts, and suicide. We recognize that these are extremely challenging topics, but we believe that this discussion is a critical part of documenting the truth about the history of residential schools in Canada and the truth of what occurred at the St. Joseph's Mission. Some Canadians find it threatening or uncomfortable that the residential school investigations are causing increased scrutiny of our colonial history and an awareness of the damage caused by the systems and institutions that were promoted in our country for generations. For those Canadians, we point out that the discomfort caused by reevaluation of Orthodox history is an unavoidable part of bringing the truth to light. It is a necessary and healthy part of our evolution and growth as a nation. What I'd like to emphasize today before we get into a presentation of the results is that the WLFN investigation and others like it across the country are affording all Canadians with a very real opportunity to participate in the exercise of reconciliation. For the victims of the St. Joseph's, for the survivors and for their families, we say this: we see you, we have heard your stories, we believe you, and the work we are doing is done for the purpose of bringing the truth to light.
Wait, Ellie, echt twee. Wanneer om gept noodle wees we go. Na sound my het geld kook be as we stels go. As wel galt Ellie en so echt. Gep team na hochweides noodle wees go. Look me man hochweid لم قتشنا نويت قالت كوبي وايت دو اخ اي بديتنس من بين السيسقت وايتنس الكست دو اخ اي سمسم دبلسقوت لكن Quen ka Quen-tmas Maleqantmas Stas hujam Swikdom Duqsalktnas Yuis khas Qalt kukbi Kunhuna pin the seat cut. El slastem white a smammeled pin. A stars as quick usums. Chilam del noodle way so we go. Machim stammes. Me lastmas. White. Qal cook beat lona til click. Conchichte. Wanneer kon kwant. We conchichten pien. We jakelpen dem. Met dem. Met ze chichten. Aus een les. Slechts pien. Zo erg. Conchichten gegooid. De slachtige am. Ze eet. Echte quick usmes. Conchichten gegooid. Selktens. Smells. Ims. Imtje oes. Conchichten gegooid. Doe toe we dacht quick usmes pien. Geld kopie. Ihuminik white. Wanahum kukstehucht kalt kukbi. Piendes piende elksendem. Majalham stemmes week genam but. Kukstehucht kalt kukbi. White lee stemne eli hujam loklo. White the cheelenstem. White am alarmand was stem. With the soul qua. But it miss hen. Nach dit leuchtes. White the soul qua. Ihuminde white ne elia. White gup cookby. At a gup cookby a knochmans. As well as walls. Elksen sisi ena. So ach. Gukstach gukpien de seat. Tral gukby. White nukuselkten. All my relations. Home.
Thank you for that opening prayer and getting us started in a good way, Elder Jean. The next call, Elder Nancy Sandy, to come up and give us a prayer for the children.
Kukanjichtam Hachmamald, Prayer to Help Children by Antoine LaRue. Makonjitskan, I will say a prayer for Richmamald, the children who cry. Elfda was Kchnimchmas, the sweat, and no one hears. Kchmamal, the skil, the date. For the children who wake up hungry. Almidi date ma at adichus, and go to bed hungry. Kchmamal, the belpstrum, for the children who are missing. Elks ich, the plap, for those who are lost. Gakwausam, the kchmamald, the knakustut, for the children who suffer alone. Da belkwasaltens as yechomindem. Kchmamalk, da kwistadam to the sweat, for the children that no one loves. Magwakanjit, wealthy Anna, the kchmamald. I will pray for these children.
We'd like to call on Elder Charlene Bellew to present a drum song, a prayer song. Elder Charlene.
Wait, Spew a execution nothing in Squext, Charlene Bellew. I will take time to pray to the Creator in my drum song, Jeannie's healing song. Pray for strength for all the matriarchs that lost their children at the residential school. I pray to you for all our leaders and our men to be able to stand with our matriarchs to help us find our children. I pray to you for strength for our children and our grandchildren, that they'll never ever go through this again. Through the prayer, I pray to the Creator for all of our investigative team, all of the survivors, that they have strength to be able to get through today and be able to hold each other up. Through Jeannie's healing song, I pray to the Creator to connect all our sacred fires that are being lit within our nations, to be able to bring our nations together so that we can heal together, support one another, and hold one another up. This is Jeannie's healing song. She left us before she passed on.
We'd now like to ask for a moment of silence for the children, for the ancestors, for the survivors. Wait up, everyone. Jetchqua, Willie Sellers, Cookbeat, Dekekal. I'd just like to welcome you all here today. I'd like to thank Elder Jean, Elder Nancy, and Elder Charlene for starting us off in a good way and really reminding us of the fight and the resilience of our people and just how proud of a people we are as being Indigenous at this time on this land, in this era. Well, holding up and starting us off with the prayer and with the language and with the song and filling our hearts and giving us that strength to get through days like today are what our ancestors fought so hard for, what they survived for, and why they were so strong in keeping that culture, that ceremony, and that language alive to this day. It's very challenging not to get emotional every single time a new announcement is made in this country, and we'd like to think that we're becoming conditioned to hear the news and to hear the findings, and to an extent we are, but we are still continued to be triggered in our day-to-day lives, whether it's announcements like this or it's something as simple as a commercial on TV, and making sure that we hold each other up during these times as both Indigenous and non-Indigenous people, as Canadians. It is of utmost importance that we don't pass judgment, and we show that support whichever way that we can to everybody, because we all do need it, and that's something that we wanted to get started with. So I'd like to welcome you to the traditional territory of the Williams Lake First Nation. It is a part of the Secwepemc Nation, a nation that stretches from Hatzoul, WLFN, Eskedem in the north to deep down into the south, into the Cranbrook area. Geographically, we are a massive nation consisting of 17 communities, but historically we consisted of 32. When we started looking at the history and legacy of our nation and what smallpox did, what the modern era did, and now sitting at 17 nations, we are a very proud people. We are a very strong people. We are a very resilient people, and very proud of who we are and where we come from. I'd like to acknowledge that we're here today to present the initial results from the second phase of the geophysical investigation of land surrounding the St. Joseph's Mission Residential School. Before we begin, we want to acknowledge again that the following material could be triggering for some people. The presentation that you're going to see involves discussion of Indian residential schools, genocide, abuse, death of children, colonial impacts, and suicide. We recognize that these are extremely challenging topics, but we believe that this discussion is a critical part of documenting the truth about the history of residential schools in Canada and the truth of what occurred at the St. Joseph's Mission. We've tried to prepare as best as possible by ensuring that there are supports in place for those who may require them following today's announcement. And to briefly summarize some of those supports, I'd like to turn it over to our WLFN Director of Health and Wellness, Kiera Dolahan.
Thank you, Chief Sellers. So today we want to recognize that anyone who might be calling in online, anyone who's present in person, anyone in the following weeks who may be triggered and requiring support, that we've provided that support for you. So today we have health supports present in council chambers. Look for the bright red shirts. We also have health supports present at the gymnasium for the live release. And we have an after-hours line that can be located on the WLFN.ca website. Also on the website is a list of resources, which are also found at either corner of the council desk here, that have 24-hour resources resources in Williams Lake and the surrounding area, and internal resources to Williams Lake First Nation. We also have spiritual first aid kits that are available just outside in the gallery here outside of council chambers. Those are present at our gymnasium as well. We have tobacco ties available at the gymnasium, thanks to Three Corners Health and Wellness staff. And we do have 2 counselors available for urgent referrals at the WLFN Health Clinic or via phone. We have paper bags provided that I'm looking around and not seeing presently to collect any tears that may fall today. So if you do have any tissues, if you cry during the presentation, please save those. We can bring those to the sacred fire later on. For our online viewers and anyone at home, the crisis support line at the Indian Residential School Survivors Society can be reached at 1-800-721-0066 and is available 24 hours a day. We will also be holding a sweat lodge ceremony on January 26th, tomorrow at 5:00 p.m. That is open to all, to anyone who would like to attend. There will be a sacred fire held at our gymnasium and community beginning on today, 2:00 p.m., ending Saturday, January 28th at 4:00 p.m. During this time, the gym will remain open 24 hours a day with cultural support staff present to support anyone who needs it. On the final day, January 28th, 5 p.m. onwards, a closing ceremony and potluck feast will be offered that is also open to all who would like to attend. And if anyone else requires urgent support, please flag down one of our support staff and we can direct you to any resources you might need. Thank you.
Thank you, Kiera. I think it's very important that we look to empower today, to encourage, to hold up, to make sure that we are there, but also acknowledge that it is okay to cry and show emotion. It is okay to talk about the history and an effort to hold up those that are currently living today and honor the ancestors that have passed on. It took me a long time to be able to show that emotion and feel good about it, but it's because of supports like the ones that we have in this room, individuals like my Steve Basil and David Archie, to make me realize that it is okay to show that emotion when you need to, because that is a part of the healing process and that is a part of who we are in finding our balance as people and as Indigenous people in this country. We encourage those watching our presentation to connect with their personal network, mental health counselor, or spiritual advisor to process the information that they're going to receive today. Like Kiera said, there is a lot of resources out there in the modern era to allow individuals to be able to heal and to show those emotions in a way that they can find their balance. Having given this brief but important summary with respect to those wellness supports, we'd like to again thank Elder Jean, Nancy, and Charlene for starting us off in a good way. I'd like to welcome you to our admin building, acknowledge the Sugarcane ARC team, our WLFN team and staff, our Chief and Council, and of course, partners that we've been working on and working with, like GeoScan, who I also see in the room. I'd like to thank the financial support from the Government of Canada, the Government of British Columbia. I'd like to thank the Library and Archives Canada, the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation, the Royal BC Museum, the Oblates of Mary Immaculate, in their facilitation of archival and photographic research over our investigation. We'd also like to acknowledge the support of the First Nation governments that we've been working with throughout the region, the province, and the country during this investigation. We are an open book here at WLFN. The sharing of knowledge is a big part of how we're going to get through these investigations as a collective. And what we've seen in the lead communities across the region, across the province, across this country, is that everybody is willing to share best practices, resources, and how to get through this together. As I mentioned earlier, the focus of this afternoon's press conference is to outline the preliminary results of the Phase 2 geophysical investigation of the former St. Joseph's Mission Residential School and Onward Ranch. Over the next hour, we're going to be discussing results of the ground-penetrating radar and magnetometry work conducted on site, an outline of archival and photographic research conducted to date, And the next steps as WLFN moves through the subsequent phases of work at St. Joseph's Mission and Onward Ranch. As we move through the presentation, it is important to remember that these results are preliminary and only reflect the work conducted to date. There are more phases of work to be completed, and our investigation has and will evolve as new information comes to light. There are approximately 782 hectares of land connected to the operation at St. Joseph's Mission that we have identified as requiring investigation. To date, only 34 hectares of that broader area has been subjected to geophysical analysis. So when we look at the overall broader landscape, we take into account the topography, we take into account existing infrastructure like the railroad, we look at creeks and streams, and that's how we're able to narrow down and, I guess, shorten the areas of interest to test and to get the GPR work done. Prior to the presentation of the results from the first phase, the WLFN investigation of St. Joseph's Mission in January of last year, I gave a relatively exhaustive history of the institution. Today, I will avoid going into the same level of detail. By way of brief summary, the St. Joseph's Mission Residential School is located just a few kilometers from the Williams Lake First Nation community of Sugarcane, south of Williams Lake, where we are now. It's approximately 8 kilometers from where we're sitting in this boardroom. It was operated as an Indian residential school between 1886 and 1981, during which time thousands of Indigenous children were forced to attend the institution. The St. Joseph's Mission was operated by various religious sects over the years and predominantly controlled by the Roman Catholic missionaries as part of the residential school system set up by the Government of Canada. The Onward Ranch was added to the Oblates holdings in 1964 and operated as a ranch and farm to sustain St. Joseph's Mission. And in later years, it housed the religious staff who operated the mission. The history of St. Joseph's Mission and the land surrounding it is very dark. I do not wish to re-traumatize survivors and their families by going into detail in the accounts of horror and suffering at St. Joseph's, but I do assert that there are a great many accounts. The documented evidence is growing every day as we explore archival records and interview survivors and their families. For the victims of the St. Joseph's, for the survivors and for their families, we say this: we see you, we have heard your stories, we believe you, and the work we are doing is done for the purpose of bringing the truth to light. In January of 2022, we released the results from the first phase of our geophysical investigation at St. Joseph's Mission. The first phase was focused on the relatively small area which encompassed the residential school's facilities and the graveyard operated by the Oblates. The geophysical research confirmed at that time that there were 93 reflections in the initial search area which display characteristics indicative of potential human remains. In January of 2022, WLFN also confirmed that there was much more work to be done at St. Joseph's Mission. The collection of information from survivor interviews and archives continued throughout 2022 and led to the WLFN defining a Phase 2 search area. Our team personally attended provincial and federal archives, Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the Royal BC Museum, the Oblates of Mary Immaculate, in order to best inform the investigation of our Phase 2 area. Today, we will convey the results of our Phase 2 geophysical investigation of lands surrounding the former St. Joseph's Mission Residential School. Across the country, there continues to be discussion and debate about the purpose and possible outcome of the WLFN investigation and others like it. Some Canadians question the legitimacy of the investigation data, whether it be geophysical, documentary, or forensic. To those who are skeptical, we assure you that there is an overwhelming abundance of evidence and that it is being carefully compiled in an orderly and scientific way. More of this evidence will come to light as we progress with our investigation. Some Canadians find it threatening or uncomfortable that the residential school investigations are causing increased scrutiny of our colonial history and an awareness of the damage caused by the systems and institutions that were promoted in our country for generations. For those Canadians, we point out that the discomfort caused by reevaluation of Orthodox history is an unavoidable part of bringing the truth to light. It is a necessary and healthy part of our evolution and growth as a nation. What I'd like to emphasize today before we get into a presentation of the results is that the WLFN investigation and others like it across the country are affording all Canadians with the very real opportunity to participate in the exercise of reconciliation. We encourage you to think critically about the past, to acknowledge where there was wrongdoing, to consider the consequences of those wrongdoings for the victims and their families, and how those wrongdoings have affected the physical, cultural, emotional, and spiritual well-being of generations of Indigenous people. Recall in July 2022, Pope Francis called these wrongdoings genocide upon his departure from visiting Indigenous nations in Canada. His Holiness's visit was to promote Indigenous healing and reconciliation for the religious institutions who participated in the creation of residential schools. We must all recognize reconciliation means acknowledgement of the harm caused and accountability to those harmed. At the end of the day, let's have a dialogue. But how we can move forward together, how we heal, and how we build stronger Indigenous communities and a stronger Canada. Let's work together and find solutions. Kukskechum to our WLFN team, to the survivors and their families who have participated in our investigation, to the governments of British Columbia and Canada who have supported us, and to all the Canadians who are watching today or following our investigation. We thank you for your interest and say that we need your continued support to bring about healing and to make reconciliation a reality. With that, I want to turn it over to Whitney Spearing to present the technical findings of our Phase 2 investigation.
Good afternoon. My name is Whitney Spearing. I'm the lead investigator for the St. Joseph's Mission Residential School investigation. The above slide shows a small agenda of the presentation that we'll cover today, including WLFN response objectives, a historic overview of St. Joseph's Mission operations, an outline of the preliminary investigation, including a brief description of the technologies employed, and the Phase 2 preliminary geophysical results. And finally, Kupi Sellers will offer some discussion on a path forward. WLFN recognizes that there are First Nations processes and protocols for doing this investigative work that must be adhered to out of respect for the missing and deceased children's families. The investigation team has ensured that all team members, staff, and consultants are informed about Indian residential schools and that they engage in ceremony for the well-being of survivors and their families. It became clear early on in the investigation that the team needed a formalized mandate that was culturally appropriate and sensitive to the needs of former students and their families. The WLFN team's objectives are engaging local legal and technical experts to develop a culturally appropriate community-based response to the search for deceased and disappeared children at the St. Joseph's Mission, assertion of jurisdiction for all work related to the St. Joseph's Mission investigation, facilitation of a culturally appropriate community-based inquiry into St. Joseph's Mission, and utilizing the profile of the investigation to educate all Canadians about the reality of residential schools and the impact they have had on Indigenous peoples. The Phase 2 investigation at St. Joseph's Mission has involved 4 components: archival and photographic research, survivor interviews, community engagement strategy, and geophysical investigation. Williams Lake First Nation has been working to identify important archival records since the release of the Phase 1 results in January of 2022. This includes review and attendance in person at several archives across Canada, including the British Columbia Provincial Archives, the Oblates of Mary Immaculate des Chalets NDC Archives, Library and Archives Canada, the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police Major Crimes Unit, E-Division, and personal and historic archives from community members. Williams Lake First Nation has been working to identify archival records related specifically to the deaths and disappearances of students and children at the St. Joseph's Mission. The National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation Memorial Register lists 16 children as being deceased at St. Joseph's Mission. However, through the course of the WLFN investigation, we have been able to ascertain that a minimum of 28 children were deceased at the mission. We are also aware that many of these children are buried at the mission in unmarked graves. It is also clear that many of the children and infant babies born at the mission as a product of child sexual assault were disposed of through incineration on and off-site at the mission. This photo submitted to the SJM team from the Museum of the Caribou Chilcotin shows male students engaged in manual labor tasks during the early industrial school era, circa 1920. Survivor interviews have formed an integral part of the Phase 2 investigation. The SJM investigation team reporting email has remained open, and to date, a total of 28 interviews have been conducted with survivors of St. Joseph's Mission, with family and community members and the non-Indigenous public. The WLFN team has traveled extensively and made contacts throughout the world to gain information about the mission, notably conducting an interview in Bangkok with a former teacher from the institution. The email remains open today, and we encourage those who may have information about the St. Joseph's Mission, its operation, and children who may be missing or deceased to come forward and arrange for a confidential interview. Survivors are able to immediately arrange their interview, and the SGM team will facilitate access to health and wellness supports while they are waiting for their interview. Critical pieces of missing information have been relocated as part of the survivor interview process, including historical accounts of the students, staff, and operations of the mission, building descriptions, layout, and areas in which crimes were perpetrated, names, birth dates, and physical descriptions of children who disappeared or were deceased at the mission, and photographs of students, staff, and buildings at the mission. This photo depicts SJM investigation team with interviewee and former WLFN elder Charlie Gilbert. The team was fortunate enough to be able to interview Charlie prior to his passing, and this aspect of the investigation has heightened the sense of urgency around collection of survivor testimony. Williams Lake First Nation has engaged in a four-pronged approach to the engagement in search for disappeared and deceased children at St. Joseph's Mission, including national and political engagement, frontline workers engagement, family engagement, and community engagement. To date, Williams Lake First Nation has held engagement sessions with the following First Nations communities: Nuwalk Nation and Algacho First Nation leadership, community, and staff, Hatsuth First Nation, Shweklam-Haiklum First Nation, Eskedem and Canam Lake First Nation frontline workers, the Psychoteen National Government leadership, and Nadle Wuten First Nation leadership and staff. This photo shows Algacho First Nation members who traveled to Williams Lake. This is a photo at the WLFN Powell Arbor. They traveled here this summer for a ceremonial trip in order to honor the St. Joseph's Mission residential school survivors still present in their community. The proposed Phase 2 investigation, geophysical investigation area, is approximately 154 hectares in size. Once the area was examined by technical experts, the size of the scannable area was reduced due to environmental conditions, including obstructions, water, bedrock, and steep slopes. High-interest areas were determined by WLFN based off survivor testimony, archival and photographic evidence, traditional use interviews, and historical significance. The geophysical investigation included magnetometry, ground-penetrating radar, drone LiDAR, as well as high-resolution aerial imagery. In total, a team of 2 to 3 field technicians spent 59 days in the Phase 2 investigation area collecting data. This map shows the total area of interest and the Phase 2 investigation at St. Joseph's Mission. The purple outline depicts the entire area of interest, and the orange shape depicts the identified Phase 2 investigation area. As more information becomes available, the shape will no doubt get larger and involve heightened scrutiny of areas in which the oblates had immediate access to, including the mission proper, the Onward Ranch, and Yellow Lake. Throughout the history of the school, both the St. Joseph's Mission and Onward Ranch properties have contained dozens of buildings associated with use as an industrial and residential school. The buildings vary in age and include several barns, dormitories, residences, outbuildings, and a historic cemetery in Phase 1. The above photo is a helicopter aerial taken of the terrain in Phase 2. From the results of our Phase 2 investigation, Williams Lake First Nation has ascertained that crimes against children were perpetrated at both of these properties, and additionally at several cabins and outposts associated with the Oblate's operation of the St. Joseph's Mission. It is a result of this information that WLFN has enlarged the investigation area to contain approximately 782 hectares. The Phase 2 investigation area was divided into individual GPR and magnetometry survey grids of varying dimensions to optimize total area coverage. Due to the differences in survey methodologies, the survey areas for each technique vary. A total of 159 GPR survey units were conducted and 207 magnetometry survey grids were collected. The areas outlined in blue on this map show the extent of the magnetometry survey grids. And the areas outlined in pink on this map show the extent of the GPR survey grids. The St. Joseph's Mission investigation team have surveyed 18.4 hectares with GPR and magnetometry technology inside the Phase 2 investigation area. All reflections seen in the GPR data have been marked and reviewed through a rigorous quality control process. To date, 66 reflections have been recorded at the St. Joseph's Mission, which display characteristics indicative of potential human burials. Current data suggests that none of the 66 reflections inside the Phase 2 area are associated with any recorded cemetery or burial areas. It must be emphasized that no geophysical investigation can provide certainty into the presence of human remains. Excavation is the only technique that will provide answers as to whether or not there are human remains present within the reflections at St. Joseph's Mission. Thank you all for your attention today and your continued support as we move through these challenging undertakings. Our investigation team is committed to seeking resolution and truth for those survivors and families who have lost children through the residential school system at St. Joseph's Mission. Chief Willie Sellers will now discuss a path for moving forward with the investigation. Thank you.
Thank you, Whitney, and we commend your staff and the partners that have been able to come on board and help us through this investigative process. Leading with ceremony and leading with our culture is the biggest part of our way to uplift our staff and being able to get this very important work done. Staff consisting of Indigenous and non-Indigenous people, and holding them up just the same and giving them the strength that they need to get through this very important and very hard work. I've seen the presentation already, and it still gets you emotional just thinking about that part of our Canadian history. But knowing that we still have our culture and we still have our ceremony, we still have our language, is uplifting enough to give us the strength to continue through the work that needs to be done. Given the implication of the results presented today, WLFN realizes that there will be many questions regarding the results and our investigation moving forward. While there are still many unknowns, the team is committed to the following strategy in the next days, weeks, and months. The team will continue to engage in dialogue with the Government of British Columbia and the Government of Canada in order to ensure that continued support for the financial aspects of this investigation are recognized and actioned. To this end, we specifically will be seeking funding for the remaining phases of geophysical work and the potential in excavation and exhumation in the Phase 1 and 2 areas. When we start talking about excavation and exhumation, there is a number of concerns that are raised, considering the amount of nations that are impacted from students going to that school. To date, we have identified 48 different nations that had kids attend the St. Joseph's Mission. 48 nations to potentially engage with when we start talking about excavation and exhumation is a scary thought. But by working together feel confident that we will be able to hold each other up through this process. We will continue to work closely with the British Columbia Coroner Service, BC Royal Canadian Mounted Police, Public Solicitor and Safety General, Attorney General, and the Ministry of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation to develop a memorandum of understanding as it relates to intrusive testing, excavation, exhumation, and identification of deceased children at the St. Joseph's Mission. We want to stress at this time that only a small portion of the area considered to be part of St. Joseph's Mission in the Onward Ranch has been subject to geophysical investigation. A lot of work remains ahead of us, and WLFN is committed to advancing work in Phase 3 in areas of interest which surround the Onward Ranch. WLFN has implemented protection measures at the St. Joseph's Mission. Preservation of the site, any evidence present in human remains is a key priority. Security patrols will be on a 24-hour basis, and additional site security measures have been installed to protect the site and will continue moving forward. In the coming weeks, the WLFN team will continue to engage directly with communities where children are known to be missing or deceased. We'll meet directly with families whose children are known to have disappeared from or died at the St. Joseph's Mission. This is in order to advance issues of genealogical research and DNA, to discuss the investigation and return records and photographs of their children who were lost through the residential school system at St. Joseph's. Continuation of archival research, retrieval of records where records are missing or redacted will determine where the next steps will be in relation to the 93 original reflections, the 66 new reflections, and whether there will be excavation of those anomalies. The team acknowledges that this is a complicated issue and one that is not easily resolved. However, the discussion must begin in order for these types of decisions to be made. The efforts to investigate and reconcile the deaths and disappearances of children at these institutions must be through the leadership of First Nations people and communities. Today, we have commitment from the federal and provincial governments that the investigation into the St. Joseph's Mission will continue through the Williams Lake First Nation. We are grateful for this commitment and are committed to working through the many complicated issues affecting this investigation, including the acquisition of lands which comprise the search area. We understand that this is a lot to process. There will be many questions regarding this announcement. In the following days, please direct any questions you may have to the WLFN team via email at St. Joseph's Mission or sjmission@wlfn.ca. A lot to process. I would just, again, encourage anybody who's looking for help, looking for support, looking for guidance, to reach out to the support staff, to call the numbers that are available. There are all sorts of supports out there that are available for you, and we encourage you to reach out to them if you're struggling. With that being said, again, I wanted to remind everyone, it is encouraging to see the amount of sacred fires that are popping up in the region to support their communities. We have our own sacred fire starting today after this announcement that will run until Saturday, and we encourage all of those Indigenous or non-Indigenous to participate if you would like. Holding each other up during these hard times is how we're going to get through it. And again, looking forward to seeing you there, hearing the drums, hearing the language, participating in the ceremony and standing with you. All my Caselton, all my relations, I want to invite up. Are we, Jean? Or Jean, could you give, Charlene? Okay. Yeah, if we could get Jean to come back up for a closing prayer.
Ali, taka kniemendem. So ach. Wanneer kap nulen wees wiko. Kamet wees kon Jean. Het is Jean wiko. Knuchen sisku. At white check. I mean them pin. Kusalk sku. Smemmelt. I mean them slachtig doe echt. En het ik heb de zo echt. I sound my trail cookbee. Is lemons the white. Last is when I who mean the white go. Witness me and I watch him lockloch. Stars coopy stem. Stem last miss. Ook sterk kocht trail cookbee. White is elks elia. You mean the cookbees go. Het white cookbees doe echt. Het luk genoeg mens. You mean the white go. Watch him trail cookbee. You is calling Jane trail cookbee. White salkten. All my relations go home.
Just as we started, we wanted to finish with prayer, finish with song. Elder Charlene Bellew, if you could please come up and close our announcement in a good way. Give us strength to move forward. Give us strength to continue on. Give us strength to those who need it.
I want to just take time to sing Arthur's peace song. Before Arthur left us in 2017, he sat in the mountains so we could have songs for days like today. Pray to the Creator for all of us to be able to find peace within our own minds, our own bodies, our own spirits. For what we heard today, if we're able to reconcile our own families, our own communities, our own nations around the work that we need to do so that families can have closure. We can actually move towards a place of reconciliation. Just pray to the Creator again through Arthur's song for us to be able to leave together, holding one another up, especially the families and the communities that are watching and are part of today. And through Arthur's peace song, I want the survivors to be able to know that they are stronger because of what we're doing today. They've survived residential school. They're going to tell their stories. And our children are going to be safer because of the work that we're going to do today. So again, I just thank you for the beautiful day and Arthur's peace song.